I'm not Sauron. Greetings, adventurers. My name is Kramer, and I just finished watching Shad's very excellent fight scene autopsy video about the Rings of Power, episode 5 of season 1, where he breaks down the training session between Galadriel and the Numenorians. And there were problems with the choreography of that fight, to be sure. Now, I'm an actor, I'm a stage combatant, and I would like to add to this conversation using his video and the Rings of Power itself more as a jumping off point to teach you something about stage combat rather than just treading old ground, because we know that the Rings of Power has issues, to put it lightly. So I'm hoping this video will be helpful not just to analyze fights because it's fun, but for those amongst us that are potentially interested in becoming stage combatants, or those of us that are burgeoning cinematographers or even experienced cinematographers that have never filmed a fight before and are looking for a little bit of information. Because the camera, I mean, of course we understand this, at least to some degree, that the camera is also a storytelling vector. It is not just the thing with which you convey any information that happens to be happening on the set. It is very specific in what it is that you are showing the audience. So if you're showing the audience that there's a swing happening that's aimed at nothing, that's wrong. You've done it wrong. Put the camera somewhere else. Put the choreography somewhere else. You know, re-angle it. You shouldn't be showing the inner workings of the machine to the audience. That's not what the camera's for. The camera helps to tell the story. It's its own character too. So you shouldn't just be looking at a fight and going, oh, well, this angle looks cool, and not even consider what's happening in the fight. It doesn't work that way. It's not always the choreography's fault. Sometimes it's the director, sometimes it's the staging, sometimes it's where the camera is positioned. And it's those people's jobs to get that part of the fight right too. It's not just about the actors learning it and then you rolling the cameras and then go, and then you put it in the editing room. It doesn't work like that. It shouldn't anyway, because then you end up with this fight from the Rings of Power. And this is where, as always, I know it probably will get old for those of you that are familiar with the channel, but if you've never taken a class on stage combat, if you don't have any experience with this, don't use a wall hanger sword where the blade doesn't have a pommel. It's just going to come flying off and accidentally hurting someone. Don't be swinging at your friends if you've never done this before. I do have training in this. And while I want to educate people and inspire people to create new things, new media, and share what I know with you, this does not take the place of actual actor combatant training. It does not. So if this is interesting to you, fantastic. Find a class and take it. I don't count as a class. I mean, I would say don't try this at home. You're supposed to say that, but I know you're gonna. That's how I started. The first thing I'd like to do is share with you what I think is a very applicable quote by the swordmaster Bob Anderson. You may know him from a number of things. He was the original Darth Vader. He was the guy in the suit doing all of those sword fights for the original Star Wars films. He was Errol Flynn's stunt double. He was, who of course was one of the original Robin Hoods. He did the choreography for The Princess Bride, and he did the choreography for The Lord of the Rings. Now, I'm going to paraphrase this quote, probably, but you can find this section for yourself. It is in the appendices, part 4 of the Two Towers Extended Edition box set. So that's the 4th disc, obviously. And it is in the section, Filming the Two Towers, The Warriors of the Third Age. And Bob says, a lot of people think that when you've got a fight, all you need to do is rehearse the moves and then go, right, where's the director? Let's shoot it. That is not it. Once you've got the fight in sequence, you then have to learn it, because you are not safe until you can do the fight at the speed that the camera desires. So what we all have to keep in mind, which probably a lot of people understand, is that stage combat is not like HEMA. It is not like actually fighting someone. It is a system that is designed to help tell a story. It is a system that is designed to have a sword fight, to have some action, without actually ever intending to injure the other person, because that is your fellow actor, that is a stunt person, and they cost money, and they're also our friends. We don't want to hurt them. As such, stage combat has a lot of tricks and mechanisms in it that are designed to keep people safe. So as a result of that, it is inherently going to not be 100% realistic. It just can't be. The next thing I will say to you is that if you don't want the movie or the stage magic of sword fights or any fights really ruined for you, then you should not watch this video. And if you do want to know what those secrets are, don't share them with someone else who does not want to know them. Because then you'll ruin the magic for them too, and that's no fun. And it's my privilege as an actor to be able to deliver that sense of magic with my performance when I'm lucky enough to get the chance to do so. So don't sit in the audience and be like, oh, this is how they do that, if your friend just wants to enjoy it and be wowed by it. Let them. But for the rest of us, analyzing fights like this is a lot of fun. We slow it down, we break it down, we see what the different moves are. Oh, this position's not correct. Oh, that would never happen in real life. That's all fun. And that community is never going away. And arguably, I'm making my job harder by telling you all of this, because you're now gonna know what it is that I'm doing when you watch me. But I think that's really exciting, because it's just going to push me further towards excellence. It means that you can get away with a lot less now than you could before, because of communities like this, because of Shad himself. And I don't at all mean that in a negative light. It's super cool, because it means that the fights logically should be pushed further and further, so that they're developing new techniques and honing that craft, so that we get a fight that we can't criticize, that we get a fight and we just get completely lost in the story and we're like, wow, that was fantastic. And there's no more of these little missteps of swinging at absolutely nothing on purpose. And I need to clarify, it's stage combat, right? So oftentimes you are swinging at nothing on purpose, but the camera shouldn't show that that's what you're doing. It should look like you're swinging at something very purposefully. So we're gonna step over to my training partner, the tree, right here, so that we can go over some very basic concepts we have to understand before I can break down what the Rings of Power does wrong and how to avoid it. So the very first vocab term that we have to learn is when you are fighting in distance or out of distance. Now, when you are fighting out of distance, what that means is that there is a predetermined distance between you and your opponent that you have to maintain during the fight in order to make sure that both people are safe. When you're fighting out of distance, you check distance, you know that you're not going to hit your opponent. And now it doesn't matter how hard I swing, I am never going to hit the other person. That keeps them safe. Now, what you don't want to run into, and again, if you want to do this, if you find this interesting, take a class so that you actually have some training under your belt. What you don't want to do is go check distance, okay, we're good, on guard. Because now all of a sudden the distance is wrong because I came into my on guard position and now I can hit my opponent. The other vocab term we need to know is when you're attacking on or offline. And this is probably familiar to you if you've done sword fighting in HEMA or something like that as well. When you visualize the body as a target, you can think of it there being a rectangle around the torso. If you're attacking online, what that means is that the blade or the point of your weapon is actually going to come into that box. When you're attacking offline, it means that that blade does not come into that box. And in stage combat, we are often trained always to attack offline unless specifically directed to, and then a whole bunch of safety protocols go into that to make sure that everyone is good. We rehearse it a lot before anything real happens, just to avoid injuries. So when you are attacking offline, in certain circumstances, there are inevitably going to be spaces between you and your opponent. That is not a fault of the choreography necessarily, because it's there to keep people safe. The onus is then on the choreographer, if you are just working with a stage play, or the director and the director of cinematography and the actual camera operator to understand the fight and know how to film fights in order to mask those things. And we'll go over that in just a second. Because as we've already established, those safety protocols have to be there. You have to hide that, though, in the choreography itself. When you're working with a stage, there's only one variable. There's the actors and there's the audience if you're in a proscenium. Proscenium means that the audience is sitting at the front of the stage, they go back to the back of the house, and then the stage is right here. Very much like you watching this video right now. When you're fighting in a proscenium, because there's only one line of sight, and that line of sight is never going to change, it's very easy to choreograph something. I say very easy. It's easier to choreograph something where you're masking those moments, because if you're going to pivot here, now my opponent is in front of me, his back will be masking me to the audience. If I'm here, it's very difficult to tell the depth of the fight. So for example, right, if I had to be stabbed on stage, obviously they're not actually going to run me through. There's no VFX where they can add the blade in post. So the blade has to come into contact with my body, and if they want the sword to pass through me, I can't do it from this angle, and I can't do it from there, because you can see that the blade is coming underneath my arm. It's very obvious. So what you would have to do, logically, is you would have to have that stab happen here. So it's a lot harder to tell what that depth is. And obviously people will go, okay, I know how that was done. But you don't necessarily see it. You know it, but you don't see it. or if the person was in front of me, their body masks that. All you see is the reaction, and then he steps away as I fall to the ground, something like that. Now, when you're working with, let's say, a theater in the round, which is where there is seating all the way around the play space, that becomes a lot more difficult because there's people that can see the fight in 360 degrees, and it's much harder to mask tricks like that. So you have to get a lot more creative with the choreography itself, and that's all up to the choreographer and the staging. When you're filming something, there's honestly less of an excuse because you are in direct control of what the audience sees. So it is then your responsibility to make sure that you are hiding those tricks, which you would only know to do if you understood the mechanics of the fight. So we know that those attacks offline have to be there, which means you can't film them in a way that's going to show that there's a huge space. In order to understand this, let's think of attacks happening on the 3 planes, right? They can happen this way, across, they can happen up and down, and they can also happen directly towards you, right? Like a stab. Generally speaking, if an attack is happening on a certain plane, you can't film it from that same plane, or it's going to be very obvious that something is not quite correct. If I am attacking you from up on high, you can't film me from the front or behind, because then you are going to see that the attack is happening offline. That's exactly what happens in the Rings of Power. There's a whole bunch of different move combos where a person is just doing this huge big swing down, but the camera is behind them, or some degree of behind them. So you can totally see that that person is swinging very wide of their partner here. So if I'm here, very far away from the camera, I realize, and my opponent is here. If I were to swing online at them, obviously you would see that I'm hitting that person. But here I'm attacking offline, and you can see the huge amount of space here between me and my opponent. But if it were filmed this way instead, even if I'm attacking offline, if I come here, am I online or offline? It's much more difficult to tell now, isn't it? I'm offline. But because the camera can only tell the depth and the direction that it's looking at, you can use that to your advantage to mask those sorts of things. And that's just a mistake when it comes to the filming of that fight. It's not a problem with the choreography that they're attacking offline. There's another way to fix that though. If the camera has to absolutely be behind the person and you still want it to look like they're not attacking thin air, don't have them attack straight up and down. Change the angle of the attack. I don't have to attack this way in order to attack your head. I can attack this way. And now all of a sudden, excuse me, now all of a sudden, if my opponent is here, instead of having this huge space, right? So all these branches here, instead of having this huge space between me and my opponent, if I'm coming down at an angle here, and then they block it, the trajectory of the attack is still aimed at the opponent. So you can see where that attack would have landed if it had landed, if it wasn't blocked by my opponent, and you can have the camera behind me at the same time, because it's a change of the angle that the swing is happening. And that is why the basic parry positions are what they are. All the basic parry positions happen offline, right? They have to happen outside this box. And that is because when you're attacking someone, even if you're aiming offline, when that block happens offline, it looks like danger was avoided so long as the angle is correct. Now, the way that you attack someone offline is you're essentially casting the sword, like you're going fishing, like it's a fishing rod. So what that means is even if I'm in distance, I can hit the tree from right where I'm standing. Even if I'm in distance, I'm not swinging at the tree. I'm swinging past the tree. It still looks like I'm swinging at the tree, but I'm stopping the attack here. I'm casting past the opponent here. That can happen in any direction. Person wasn't ever in danger because the attack was always aimed at this spot, but because the sword came there, it was still aimed at my body, even though it wasn't going to hit me, and then it makes a lovely little clang sound and we can enjoy the fight. And this is obviously true for any weapon type. Cast past the opponent. I'll do the casting from this angle too, so I can touch the camera from here. I am in distance with the tripod and the camera. I'm going to swing at you. This is an expensive gimmick to be doing right now. Still looks like I'm cutting at you. but I'm not going to hit you. That came real close to you probably heard that in the mic though, didn't you? So the way that you attack offline, or at least the way that I do it, if you don't fish, I don't fish. This is just the description that I was given, so I figured it might be helpful for some people. As I'm swinging, I'm locking out my elbow first, and then I lock out my wrist. And what that means is that this attack is going to land in the same place exactly where I'm aiming it every time, because the physics of my arm, this sword can't go below this point unless I move my entire arm, or if I break that line, because the wrist locks out and the elbow locks out. So you obviously wouldn't want to do this in HEMA or something like that, because it is a major telegraph. That is wrong if you're actually fighting someone. But it's very good for stage combat, because not only does it attack offline, even though it looks like I'm going to hit you, you parry, so the choreography makes sense, but you were never in danger. This is also a form of telegraph to let you know the move is coming now, it's time for you to parry. And then the sequence, you have little cues in the sequence to remind you, okay, when that happens, this happens. When that happens, this happens. When that happens, this happens. So you know all of these things. And I talk about that in my medieval combat reference video. That was for like video game animations, but I'm taking that from what I know of stage combat. So it's all very connected. A telegraph is not for the audience. You're not doing this. You're not doing that for the audience's benefit. This, that is not acting. You are telegraphing so that the sequence of moves is easier to remember for you and your partner. You are telegraphing to keep the both of you safe. But again, these things, the telegraph, the attacking offline, those are mechanics of the fight system. Those are not the fight system. You should not be showcasing those to the audience. The audience wants to see you actually fight someone. They don't want to see you doing, that it's ridiculous. It takes you right out of the moment. Again, unless it's the style, of the play that you're going for. If it's like sort of slapsticky, sure. Another thing that you want to avoid in order to keep things realistic, because when an attack looks wrong, the eye can catch it even if you don't know anything about swords. You can look at it and go, something about that seems wrong. And then no matter whether or not you know about swords or not, if you're questioning the reality of the fight, you've been taken out of the moment, and then the story disappears. So we're gonna use the stick because it's a little shorter. What you want to avoid is ever having the swords cross here, inside the box online, right? The swords are now crossing. I'm parrying this attack, right? And it's happening inside my box, because what that says is that this attack came in to a place where it should have hit me. It didn't hit me, and then I blocked it anyway. So there were a couple times where that happened in the Rings of Power fight as well, where the swords are just clashing here in front of the two actors. That shouldn't be happening. A block always has to happen offline. In regular fighting too, that like when you learn fencing, the point can still stay online, right? The point can still come onto the target, but when you're blocking, even if you're just using the handguard to deflect the blade, even if it's just a small little movement, it still has to be offline, otherwise the point's gonna come into my body. It has to be outside the box of my torso, and then the point can stay here. To quickly recap, it's honestly pretty rudimentary stuff. When you're fighting another person for the stage or for screen, you don't actually want to hurt them. So, therefore, there are elements in the choreography that are there for the safety of the actors. Those things cannot be avoided unless you're like Jackie Chan or from the old days, right? Where people didn't care about their own safety. Honestly, a pretty epic time where people were just like, hit me. And I've done that for some plays where instead of doing a stage slap, I'm like, just hit me in the face. I trust you more to hit me in the face than to fake it, so just hit me in the face. But most of the time you can't get away with that, especially when you're using heavier weapons like that. You're just not. There's always anecdotes though, because then there's John Rhys Davies literally just like hitting the orcs with his axe, whatever. For the rest of us mortals, you're not trying to hurt the other person, you're not going to hit the other person. Therefore, the choreography is designed so that you're not in danger of hitting the other person. That is when you're fighting out of distance, or if you're in distance, where you're attacking offline, or both. When you're attacking offline, there was a proper way to do it in order to maintain the direction of the cut so that it looks realistic, right? If I'm attacking straight down and the camera's behind me, you can see that space, but if I'm coming at an angle, then it still looks like my target was the person rather than way off to the side. What that means is that that is not the fault of the choreography necessarily. It is the fault of the staging that you see that is happening. You're not supposed to see that. Cameras can only tell the depth that they're looking at. If an attack is happening on a certain plane, the camera can't be on that same plane. It has to be perpendicular to it, and that will mask the depth that the viewer is seeing. Very simple. I say very simple, and then the Rings of Power like makes all of these mistakes. Now, I don't claim to know absolutely everything in the world, but if the fight can be criticized, then we're going to criticize it. It only helps tell the story better if the choreography is good, and it's shot well. And if it's not, then it takes you out of the moment, and then you failed. And honestly, it might be one of those things where it's like, we know that they shot that fight in a day. That's what they said. It's possible that they had the fight prepared and they were practicing it for weeks beforehand, and then they just shot it in a day. It's also possible that all of the actors just showed up and they were like, all right, we're going to film a fight today. What do you got? And then they made it up on the spot and then turned on the camera. The cameras roll, and then they shot it from a whole bunch of different angles and went, we'll fix it in the editing room. And I really think that's the wrong way to do that. And I don't want to just like harp on the actors that were in the Rings of Power, because it's entirely possible that they were just doing exactly what they were told to. It could be that they knew better and that they were just ordered to, so they had to do it because it was their job, or it could be that they didn't know any better. I don't know what the reason is. I just know that it happened, and I know that it looks silly. And that it doesn't tell the right story, right? Fights are not just there to be flashy. Fights are there to tell a moment of the story within the overarching story. If they're just fighting for no reason, like, what are you doing? Bob Anderson has a quote about that too. You know what? If you would like me to make a follow-up video about how, from a choreography perspective, a fight should be inserted into a story to tell part of that story, then I will make that follow-up video. You can drop that in the comments below. In the meantime, I have a whole playlist of my sword-related videos now, because I have enough of them. Who doesn't like a little bit of swordplay? And in the meantime, I'd like to wish you good luck on your adventures.